Happy Cyber Snow Day or Rain Day, whatever this is. Anyway, today we're going to go over viruses and how to defend against them and other infections. So we need to start by looking at what exactly is an infection in the first place. And so we're looking at really a parasitic relationship where one organism, the parasite, that is not normally found within another organism, the host, that parasite is going to be able to enter, grow, and potentially even reproduce within the host. So we can be thinking about things that are viral, bacterial, fungal, protozoan, or parasitic, and we're thinking some long evolutionary histories here, so keep that in the back of your mind as we move forward. Because we're starting by looking at viruses, I want to take a look at the characteristics of living things. This should be totally, this, right? So 8 characteristics here. Made of cells, maintain homeostasis, have to be able to respond to stimuli and have a metabolism, grow, develop, have DNA as a genetic material, and reproduce. And as a group, they're going to be able to evolve. So with that in mind, what exactly is a virus? I've got a whole bunch of pictures up here for you. And essentially, we can break it down into the most simple thing. Viruses are anything that has genetic materials wrapped into a capsid, okay? Now, those genetic materials are way different than what we're used to seeing. We're still seeing DNA and RNA, right? Same nucleotides, but now the DNA could be double or even single-stranded, which is really odd. And for RNA, that can be double-stranded or single-stranded, and you can even have kind of some pieces of double versus single-stranded throughout the entire genome. In terms of the shape of the genome, it can be circular, linear, or even segmented. We can take a look right here at the influenza virus, and you see that it's a whole bunch of chromosomes, not just one, like long one that you'd expect. And here's the Ebola virus, and that entire genome is encapsulated with like this long protein coat. It's super bizarre when you compare it to what we've been studying so far. So viruses always contain genetic material and a capsid. And a capsid is just a protein structure, a protein like encapsulation that is made out of like these repeating units called capsomeres. And what this is going to do is really allow for the virus to minimize how much information it needs to store in its genome. The fewer proteins that you have, the fewer genes you need, and the smaller that you can be. And size is definitely a consideration, as we'll go over. So let's say we're taking a look at this kind of icosahedral shape right here. It's just a bunch of proteins that repeat over and over again to make triangle shapes, and then each of the triangle faces then are going to make this like 20-sided shape. Okay, in addition, viruses can also contain enzymes directly packaged in the protein coat. We can see again on the Ebola right here, there's like these little protein pieces. Some of those are going to be enzymes, but they're not active. They're not doing anything. There's no chemical reactions happening right now. And they can also have an envelope, which is derived from the host cell. So they're not made of cells. They can't maintain homeostasis. In fact, they're not even active unless they're in a cell. They can respond to stimuli if that stimulus is the presence of a cell. But even that is like probably should be scratched off. They have a metabolism, again, only when they're in the cells. And they don't really grow. They assemble, and they definitely don't develop. Some have DNA as a genetic material, some don't. But they do reproduce, kind of. And they definitely evolve, in fact, a heck of a lot faster than cellular living things. Okay, so we need to look at what is a host cell. Viruses cannot just go into any cell. They have to be able to bind to a receptor on the cell membrane surface, and once they've bound, then they can enter. And so the host cell has to have the right receptor, which means viruses are going to be specific to the species as well as to the type of cell that they're binding into. For example, if we take a look at the rhinovirus, it's a common cold, and it's only going to attach to the cells of the respiratory system. So you can take like a whole handful of rhinovirus, and as long as you don't inhale it, you can rub it onto any part of your, rub it into an open wound in your thigh, and you're not going to get a cold unless you inhale it. I don't know why you do that. That's a really weird thing to do. Don't do that. And most are species specific, or they have a very small host range. So there are some flu viruses, for example, that can jump from from birds to humans, right? Avian flus. You have a lot of weird tropical type viruses that have crossed into humans. That's believed to be the entryway of HIV virus, that it was a virus in monkeys, the simian HIV virus, and then somehow jumped ship to us. So, but for the most part, they're going to be pretty limited in their host range. So let's take a look at the general viral life cycle. In the image that I took from the book, it has entry as step number 1, but before that, the virus has to be able to bind to the host cell, like I just said. Then it can enter. Now, viruses that have envelopes can sometimes have that envelope merge with the cell membrane, and then the envelope kind of like dissolves into the cell membrane, and that allows the rest of the viral particle into the cell. The host cell can sometimes endocytose the viral particle, and then the viral particle can kind of burst open that vesicle, or the virus can even just inject the genome directly into the cell. But somehow the viral genetic material has to enter. At that point, two things are going to happen. That viral genetic information is going to need to make more of the viral genome, and it has to be transcribed and translated. So let's talk a second about our central dogma. We should know this pretty well, right? DNA to mRNA to protein. We know this, right? Right? Oh, Lordy. Okay. However, viruses are a little bit weird. In RNA viruses, there are some that are going to be able to use their RNA to make the protein, and they're also going to make take the RNA that they came with, make a complementary copy of it, and then use that complementary copy to continue making more and more RNA genomes. Okay. There are also some viruses that are able to take RNA, reverse transcribe it into DNA, and then take that DNA and put it into the host genome. Crazy, right? That means every time the DNA, like the cell replicates, it's going to replicate the host DNA along with the viral DNA. That's crazy. And so these are called retroviruses, or the backward viruses, and that includes HIV, which is the virus that causes AIDS. Okay, back to the general life cycle. So we talked replication by some type of mechanism, as well as protein synthesis, because they are going to need to produce the capsid proteins, as well as any enzyme that might go into the viral particle when it is completed. And finally, all those pieces have to self-assemble and then exit from the cell. Okay, so the viral particle can kind of bud off, and that's going to take membrane with it, so that now it's got an envelope again, or it could cause complete bursting of the cell. So I can talk a little bit more about two life cycles in general that are found in bacterial phages or bacteriophages, which are just viruses that infect bacteria. Because they're so well studied, they have defined life cycles that scientists have understood for a long time. So we're going to talk about the lytic and the lysogenic life cycles of the T4 bacteriophage. And I mean, look at how incredibly complex this guy is. He's got the headpiece right here with those icosahedral shaped protein or capsomeres, and that's got the DNA in it. And then you've got this long circular piece that makes up the body, and then these tail fibers that bind to the receptors on the bacteria. And this guy's actually going to be injecting the DNA into the cell, so right through the membrane and into the cell. Definitely an example of a virus that has had a long evolutionary history with bacteria. Anyway, so the T4 bacteriophage has two types of life cycles, either lytic or lysogenic. Lytic is referring to the fact that it lyses open the cell by the end of it, so this is going to lead to cell death. In the lysogenic reproductive cycle, you're going to have the bacteria remain whole, and the DNA of the phage is just going to stay kind of tucked in there for quite a while. So replication can happen without causing the host cell to be destroyed. However, typically then we're going to go into a virulent stage and go back to a lytic life cycle. So let me show you that in pictures to make it make a little bit more sense. Here we've got the lytic life cycle. We've got the phage attached to the bacteria, injecting its DNA right here. That DNA is going to be used to make a whole bunch of proteins and more DNA, and that all assembles together. And once all of that is complete, and they kind of complete simultaneously, they like right out of the cell, right? Lyse open the entire thing. And now each one of these is its own infectious particle. In the lysogenic cycle, however, we're still going to have the phage. It's injecting its DNA. But now that DNA is like inside the cell with the cell. That's going to cause the DNA to kind of like integrate itself into the bacterial genome. At this point, it's called a prophage, which just means it's viral DNA, but it's kind of inert. It's not really doing anything, and it's just chilling there with the host. So every time the bacteria replicates, remember binary fission, that prophage is going to get replicated as well. And it's just going to keep on doing that. The daughter cell is going to continue to have that prophage material in there. And then at some point, there's some kind of factor that leads to a switch from the lysogenic life cycle to the lytic life cycle. And then at that point, you'd go back to having the cells burst open full of viral particles. Okay, one thing that I didn't understand when I was in high school is that those lytic and lysogenic life cycles are really only for phage bacteria. Animal viruses tend to do it a little bit different. They often have envelopes, and so you have a life cycle that looks more like this, and we can look at the example specifically with HIV. The human immunodeficiency virus is going to be an enveloped protein, an enveloped virus. It's got its its RNA in here, but it also has the reverse transcriptase that I talked about earlier. So what this guy's going to do is merge the envelope with the host cell membrane. That's going to allow the viral particle to enter into the cell. And then once the viral particle is into the cell, the viral RNA is going to be reverse transcribed into DNA. So we are using the RNA to make DNA. The DNA makes complementary bases, and that DNA gets integrated into the host cell genome as a provirus, just like we saw before. It's constantly making small amounts of proteins that are going to constantly be allowing new viral particles to emerge from these cells. So even though it's just chilling kind of in the DNA, it's still making the mRNA so that you can make the capsomeres, so that you can make the other glycoproteins that go on the outside of the membrane. It's still doing all of that, but not bursting open the cell. And here you can see how it's taken into the cell. Excuse me. Right, here's the viral particle here. The membranes fuse, and then the viral particle can enter. And this is like the budding process that's going to take the host membrane with it to make the envelope. Okay, so not only should we be thinking about viruses, but also other infectious agents. I'm mentioning this only because for immunology, it's going to be important to know that bacteria, fungi, protozoans, and parasites are different than our cells. I know that makes sense. It's like obvious, right? But for bacteria, we remember they're prokaryotic. They're going to have cell walls, potentially made of peptidoglycans. They can potentially have plasmids, and they might have a capsule. And that capsule is going to have all kinds of different proteins and sugars on it. Fungi, they can have chitin in them. Protozoans, these are single-celled eukaryotes that are like early animals. That's what the term protozoa means. And parasites can also infect us, which can be on our insides, or endoparasites, all those like worms and good stuff that you see about on TV, or ectoparasites, meaning outside parasites, so different insects, lice, and all that crap. And this has led to, because we have such long evolutionary histories with viruses, with bacteria, with everything, the parasites have evolved to take advantage of the host. In return, the hosts have needed mechanisms to protect against infection. So any host that is better adapted, is better capable of fighting off an infection or not getting infected in the first place, is not going to die as readily and is going to be more likely to pass on those traits. So natural selection. It's led to this arms race between the parasite and the host. And that's going to lead us into our immunology lecture.